Black screen, text in white reads, Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts and Real Abilities Film Festival New York present Let's Laugh More, exploring the relationship between disability and humor. This virtual Zoom panel was recorded on Monday, May 1st, 2023. My name is Carrie Candeloro, and I am the Access Coordinator at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. I am a white disabled woman with a brown curly bob, wearing a black and brown checkered collared dress, a gold necklace, and earrings. In the background is a blurry image of a chalkboard wall in the offices of Lincoln Center. 2023 marks Lincoln Center's 9th year participating in the Real Abilities Film Festival, and we are so excited to once again partner with an organization that shares our joy in celebrating disability both on and off the screen. This conversation opens on a Zoom webinar featuring 8 people in 8 individual screens. 2 of those screens show ASL interpreters. The other 6 people will introduce themselves and give image descriptions as they begin to speak.
Tonight, in this Zoom space, you are welcome to come as you are and be comfortable. I'll just spend a few moments right now highlighting Zoom functions and what to expect for the evening. This program is set in webinar format, which means that your cameras will remain off during the evening. We have captioning available for today's program. Thank you, Jane, for captioning. If you would like to use the closed captioning function, you can do this by clicking the box with the live transcript closed captioning CC icon, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Sometimes this is called subtitle. You can change the size of the subtitles or view the whole transcript. We have ASL interpretation for tonight's panel as well. Thank you, Candace and Katura, for making this evening so wonderful. The ASL interpreters will be spotlit, and you can make them larger or smaller on your screen if you would like. For the end of this event, you will have a chance to ask questions of our panelists. You can submit your questions using the Q&A function. Our tech doula, Miranda, may invite you to speak. You will receive a prompt to confirm whether or not you want to stay muted or unmuted. Tonight's program will run 1 hour in length and will be recorded to be posted publicly on a future date. If you have any access needs or having any technical issues, please message our tech and access doula, Miranda, in the chat and she can assist. To get to the chat feature, there is an icon with a bubble and it's usually at the bottom of your screen. Tonight, we are so excited to present Let's Laugh More, a panel exploring the relationship between disability and humor. Upon learning of Stephen Verdili and his work with the Squeaky Wheel, our team was so excited to feature him on our virtual stage. Lincoln Center is a home for artists to bear their truths and share their stories. In addition to regularly presenting live streamed events, we are excited to put a spotlight on disability artistry this summer with a 4-part event series called Access Ecologies, curated by Kevin Gotkin, which will have both in-person and virtual options. So presenting Stephen Verdili's piece here tonight was obvious. Thank you to Ravi, Isaac, and the Real Abilities team for sharing such wonderful programming each year. There are so many exciting events during the festival. I encourage you all to check out the Real Abilities website, which is realabilities.org/New York, and check out other Real Abilities events before the festival ends on Wednesday. And now I'll talk a little bit more about our host for this evening, Stephen Verdili. Stephen has a neuromuscular disability known as spinal muscular atrophy and is a full-time wheelchair user. He hates stairs, so please do not invite him to visit your favorite staircase. He works as a creative content manager for NBC Universal, where he advocates for positive disability representation in television and film. His experience as a disabled person working in media led him to create The Squeaky Wheel, the first ever satire publication to focus on disability. The Squeaky Wheel challenges common misconceptions, highlights absurdity, criticizes imbalances, and does it all with humor. Since launching The Squeaky Wheel, Stephen Verdili has done numerous podcasts and interviews, including Forbes and The Accessible Stall with Emily Ladau, to discuss the intersection of disability and humor. He is joined by 5 disabled humorists from The Squeaky Wheel to talk about that intersection tonight. So, without further ado, Stephen.
Thank you, Carrie, and hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Verdili. I am a white man with a brown hair, brown beard. I'm wearing gold circular glasses, using a power wheelchair, and wearing a dark blue shirt with some buttons. I want to thank Lincoln Center and the entire team that not only is making this possible, but making it accessible so that so many people can join us, as well as Real Abilities, who is involved in getting this event organized. Speaking on behalf of myself and the writers, we're really excited to be here and be able to do this. We've been working with Squeaky Wheel for several years, and to have an opportunity like this to kind of talk about behind the scenes what happens, our inspirations, and really the relationship between disability and humor overall is something that's really important to all of us. I'm going to introduce all the panelists and ask them to not only share their visual descriptions, but to share their favorite Squeaky Wheel stories so that you guys can really see the voices behind the stories that you're going to be seeing tonight. So I'm going to start with Julia. Julia Lee Harder is a Texas-based neurodivergent and chronically ill writer, journalist, and lover of all things cozy. She's currently working on a young adult romance novel about loving a body that doesn't always love you back. Julia.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia Lee Harder. I'm a white woman with long brown hair, wearing a green silk top and glasses. Behind me is my apartment in Austin and a bulletin board with various images on it, one of which is a Squeaky Wheel patch. And my favorite story that I've written for Squeaky Wheel so far would have to be Testing Accommodations Are Unfair, Cry Student Who Got the Answers from Chegg. Excited to be here.
Thank you, Julia. Next, we have Leslie. Leslie Moon has chronic pain syndrome and ME/CFS, but somehow is still a comedy writer, video producer, and script editor who's acted on stage and directed for film. When asked how he has the energy, he said, "I don't." Leslie, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Leslie Moon. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a white man with short brown hair, wearing glasses, and wearing a close-knit brown sweater and sitting in front of like a white wall that's sort of paint speckled. And I'm a staff writer for the Squeaky Wheel, and I run the writer's block on YouTube.
Yes. And can you tell us your favorite story, Leslie?
Oh, my favorite story is Stephen Hawking could work. Why can't you? Asks man who isn't an astrophysicist.
One of our very popular stories that gets shared every few weeks. I see someone talking about that one. Is really great. Next, we have Alexia. Alexia Kimberlin is a hard of hearing writer from Ohio. She pretends to be good at lip reading, but is actually just an expert at bullshitting. She is a strong advocate for disability rights and for eating breakfast foods at all hours of the day. Alexia.
Thanks, Stephen. This is Alexia. Visual description is that I'm a white woman in my early 20s. I have shoulder length blonde hair that's straight. I'm wearing a pink shirt, and you can see some tattoos on my arms, and my background is blurred. And my favorite story that I've written for Squeaky Wheel so far is Girl Boss. This woman hasn't turned her hearing aids on for meaning in 6 years. And it's a bit autobiographical, I'll be honest.
Another fantastic one. Thank you for sharing that with us. Next up, we have Nate. Nate Rudin is a stand-up comedian and improviser from Chicago. He lives with mild ataxic cerebral palsy and is a graduate of the Second City Writing Program. He loves wordplay, horror movies, musicals, and operas. Nate?
Hi, I'm Nate. I am a white man with brown hair and glasses. In my apartment in Chicago, behind me is a white wall with a heating panel visible. Use he, him pronouns. My favorite article I've written is Boyfriend finally pops the question, so what happened to you?
Another one of our favorites. And then last but certainly not least, we have Angela Woon. Angela works in communications and graphic design for healthcare organizations and is currently a Squeaky Wheel contributor. Originally from Malaysia, she went to school in Iowa and splits her time now between San Francisco, California, and Port Angeles, Washington. She has retinitis pigmentosa, a rare degenerative eye disease, and uses her disability to ignore people she doesn't like. Angela.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Woon, and I'm excited to be here. My pronouns are she and her. I am an Asian woman with straight black hair, just a little bit past my shoulder. And I'm wearing a dark gray t-shirt that reads in Braille, live, laugh, run, now. Words that I live by. And because my apartment is messy, you don't even get the privilege of seeing it blurred out. Instead, you get to see a photo I took. It's reddish brown sandstone rock formation called a wave in Arizona, which is a lot better than my apartment. My favorite story that I wrote is 10-year-old teacher's masterclass for adults on communicating with disabled people.
Thank you for sharing that, Angela. That is another one of our favorites, and like many of these stories, somewhat truthful, not only satirical. So before we sort of get into our conversation, our questions, I'm going to give a little bit of backstory on the Squeaky Wheel and how it was started. Some of you may have heard the story already, but for those of you who haven't. So about 3 years ago, I myself was trying to find a project during the beginning of the pandemic to sort of tell all these disability stories that I wanted to share. I tried doing some things in more an essay form. I thought about doing a short film. I was really sort of struggling to find the right format. And then drawing inspiration from some other satire magazines like The Onion and Reductress, I found that this sort of satirical news format worked really well for disability, often because the way that we normally see disability portrayed in media is kind of silly, or it feels silly to people with disabilities. So when I found this format, I started writing stories that made sense to me. And to me, my disability has always felt funny and weird and awkward and not really sad or inspirational or serious. So I wanted the stories to feel that way as well. I wrote about 30 of them. I posted them all over the internet. And I was fortunate that I not only found an audience, but I found a group of people who wanted to write as well. And that was really exciting that there was so many other disabled people out there who saw it, related to it, and actually wanted to become part of it. I only know my own perspective and my own experiences of disability. So it was really important to me from the beginning, as soon as I could, to get other people involved. And that was when I met all of these wonderful writers, as well as over 20 others who have written stories for us over the last 2 years. Tonight, we're going to talk about the relationship between disability and humor. I thought it was very fitting that Lincoln Center is hosting this event, because just a few months ago, I was there and I saw the show, The Old Man in the Pool. And a lot of people, or I should say The Old Man in the Pool, a one-man comedy show from comedian Mike Birbiglia. And a lot of people would go and see a show like that, and they would think it's funny and enjoy it, but they wouldn't think of it as a disability story. And I want us tonight to think about disability in sort of the most wide and inclusive definition, which includes things like mental illness, neurodivergence, chronic illness, sickness, all of these things that aren't actually rare, but are quite common, fit into disability stories. That show talked a lot about mortality. It talked a lot about getting sick and sort of the experience of aging. Again, things that people might not think of as disability on the surface level, but at the Squeaky Wheel, we're taking sort of a very wide and inclusive range of what disability means. So without any more elaboration, I'm going to dive right into our first question, which was very inspired by Real Abilities, one of our hosts for tonight. And this question is for Leslie. So Leslie, you wrote the story, Doctor Strange Struggles to Find Universe, where he's actually played by a disabled actor, as seen on this image. Can you tell us the inspiration for that story?
Yeah, well, I think like sort of the elephant in the room when it comes to representation, I think it's something that we all really support. It is an age where we really care about the actors who play the roles in the stories we see. That disability has sort of been left out of that equation in quite an odd way. And I think that was just a way of me really talking about this habit we have in film, especially nowadays, that disability is always a really useful tool to establish and ground a character. And you see it all the time, especially in Marvel films. That's why it's such a good opportunity to write an article about it. You know, you get landed with a character like Captain America, who's tall and blonde and muscular and kind of Aryan, and you think, oh God, how are we going to make this work? And then, okay, he's a poor, weak, sickly lad who that's why he understands the value of strength. And you go, oh, okay, there we go. And disability being used to humanize a character is pretty common. Disabled actor playing them isn't. And disability tends to get ignored over time and pushed back, especially with a franchise sort of thing. So I'm not even going to make the attempt to justify morally why minority actors should play minority characters. I think we all know that. But rather than just being right, I think what it would give us is that disabled perspective on that character, especially in a franchise thing where writers and directors come and go, that the actor is often the continuity of the character. And I just think with such a part of the discourse being about representation and disability being seemingly left out of that, I couldn't help but sort of lance it with an article on the squeaky wheel. Helped, of course, by the fact there's a scene where he sees alternate universe versions of himself. It was too good to resist.
Can you share a little bit about why Doctor Strange in particular?
Oh, well, he's such an interesting sort of example, really, because he doesn't sort of fit the silhouette of what people assume a disabled person would look like. I think a lot of people visualize someone in a wheelchair, probably. But, you know, by every definition, he's a disabled character. His hands are horribly mangled. He's left with chronic, constant pain. And yet people kind of forget. I know people who like watch the films and forget that he's supposed to be in chronic pain the whole time and is dealing with a disability. They sort of ignore that narratively over the series as well. And I just think that disability is like such a fresh source for really great drama. And I think people who write, even if they're able-bodied, kind of know that. They use it enough. And that was my way of reminding people, especially since, you know, I've got chronic pain as well. It's hard to forget. But it was a good opportunity to remind people that this is a disabled character who's currently being played by an able-bodied actor.
Thank you for sharing. I think that sort of goes back to what I was saying before too, that people don't think of disability stories as disability stories quite often because they have a very narrow perspective on what disability is. But like you said, Doctor Strange, by any definition, is clearly a disabled character, but people don't necessarily see him that way, primarily because he's not played by a disabled actor. And that sort of ruins the illusion and sort of takes away some of that authenticity. Next, I have a question for Alexia. You wrote the story for us. Okay, fine, we get it. GoFundMe scraps the fundraising stuff and pivots to healthcare. Very different from the Doctor Strange story. But most of the sort of conversation around healthcare and the lack of healthcare tends to be really angry and serious. But I love this story because it switches that anger for humor on a topic, again, that is so serious. Why do you think that humor can be more effective than anger in expressing that frustration and entertaining our audience?
Yeah, thank you. I really love that question. And I kind of want to answer it from like two angles. So first, from the angle of, you know, the disabled writers, the disability community who are reading these stories and like feeling the truth. And then because they've been impacted by that, I think that a lot of times when we're experiencing inaccessibility or experiencing injustices, that anger and frustration can get like so exhausting, and especially like responding to it in advocacy and activism can become really exhausting. And so when I first heard this question from you, Stephen, I thought a lot about work and writing done by Black feminist workers, especially Adrienne Maree Brown, who has come up with this idea of pleasure activism. And I'm not going to even come close to explaining it. So I highly recommend that you read her book, Pleasure Activism, and her other book, Emergent Strategies. But she kind of has this idea that like doing things that are joyful and fun can be part of activism, and the activism can be something that's fulfilling and fun and joyful. It doesn't just have to be hard and difficult and exhausting all the time. And so when I learned about that from her, I kind of thought that that's what the squeaky wheel is for me, right? Like it's taking these things that are really frustrating and exhausting in daily life and like twisting them into something that's funny, but is still, you know, calling out the problem or the injustice. And then from the other perspective, I think that humor can be really useful for affecting change in that it's much easier for people to feel connection to a lighter emotion like humor, even if it is about a darker topic, than it is for people to feel connected to anger. So sometimes when people are feeling like angry about an injustice, the response on the other side is like defensiveness. Like they want to fight about it, they want to get defensive, they want to argue about it. But humor kind of creates this path to like connect over something that we can both come to it and recognize like, okay, this is actually like very absurd. Like regardless of what your politics or life experiences are, we can just like recognize that this is like absurd and kind of funny. So I think it like offers that connection space as well.
Very, very well said. I will say a lot of people who first encounter Squeaky Wheel tell me or send comments that are along the lines of, I don't know if this is supposed to make me mad or make me laugh. And I think that's kind of the point, is it can certainly do both. It can be entertaining and humor as well as be activism. So thank you for putting that in much clearer words than I could. And on a similar topic, Nate, you wrote the story Disabled Monopoly Player Panics as Assets Approach $2,000. I loved this story the moment that you pitched it because it takes a really complicated topic, which is sort of this means tested healthcare benefit that can be really confusing, and it makes it really easy to understand why that sort of system can quickly become a problem. So can you tell me a little more sort of about the story and what your goal was with the story?
Yes, so I started thinking about the topic, you can't have more than $2,000. And then I thought, what's something else that has $2,000 in it? And my first thought, of course, was Monopoly. So I just sort of combined the two and then worked out the subtext afterwards. And I did it, my first run through, it said cash, and I had to look at the laws and learn that it was all assets and not just cash. And then I had to like go into law in Monopoly, and it was worth it at the end. But yeah, I think it, I like using analogies, and I thought it was an easy way to.
Absolutely, it really is it's a really clean analogy for Medicaid and the asset limits that again can be so complicated and confusing for people. But when you put it that way of, oh, it becomes a problem to have too much money, especially when it's an amount of money that most of us would agree is not millions of dollars. It's a very reasonable amount of money to want to have in the United States. So I think that really does a good job of portraying the absurdity, like Alexia had mentioned before. Pivoting to a different topic. As I mentioned earlier, when I was starting the Squeaky Wheel, I wanted to find other people with disabilities who have different perspectives from my own, because I only know my own one experience of one disability in one person in one city as me. But disability itself is such a wide demographic. It touches every race, every gender, every economic background, all people sort of can experience and do experience disability. This brings me to a story that I loved from Angela, which was #red flag disabled, but you're so pretty and smart, says man. So Angela, I want you to tell us a little bit about the story, your inspiration for it. I also want to shout out that this is another one that is constantly brought up on our Instagram and Twitter, that people really resonate with this. So Angela, can you tell us a little more about it?
Sure, thanks, Stephen. So this story is about a woman going on a date and wondering when is the right time to tell her date that she has a disability. And as with a lot of online dates, you start texting. So she's done that a while. And so this is like her first in-person date. So she decides to be transparent about it, and tells him in the end. And, after all, there's really nothing to hide. A disability is nothing to be ashamed of, and it's something that should be embraced. So this inspiration comes from having listened to podcasts and reading stories of people wondering that same thing. People who have invisible disabilities, more so, I think, wondering, should they tell before they go to first base, second base, third base, fourth base? So I think this story, is one of the reasons why it resonates with a lot of people. I myself did not have that conundrum with my boyfriend because I was diagnosed several years after we met. And he has been a great support. But what I did go through before my boyfriend was just god awful dates. And this story is sort of based upon those dates in terms of how some people can just be so crass and so clueless. So combine the two ideas, and the story approaches ableism and misconceptions about people having disabilities. If you read the story, I kind of call out, like people think that just because you are disabled that they're surprised that you go to an Ivy League school, or that you are pretty, or that you're sexy. And they find you as, the classic inspiration, like, oh, you're so inspirational, you walk to the grocery store sort of mentality. So this story, I wanted it to be sort of a reminder to people that, everyone is different, everyone is unique. Disabled, non-disabled, we're all different. And if you have a disability, not everybody's disability is the same. So I have retinitis pigmentosa, and someone who does have that too, we're probably not on the same spectrum. They could probably see a lot more, or I could see a lot less, so it really varies. And so the story is, to drive home the point that, that we shouldn't make generalized comments about people, that we should really get to know someone, especially on a date. And, I think that we should not assume that people cannot do something as well. And so I think if you need to weed out the douchebags on your date, you should definitely read the story.
That is a great answer. Thank you for sharing that with us, Angela. Like you were saying, sometimes it seems as if every disability experience is very specific and unique, and that is certainly true. All of these experiences are very unique, but in a way, as a whole, they're all quite shared in terms of facing ableism, facing discrimination, facing people being awkward and weird because they don't know how to interact with someone who's different than them. One story that came to me in a pitch, and it was sort of very funny and very specific, was from Julia. The story headline was "Woman with sensory issues becomes fashion icon after changing outfits 5 times a day." And I saw this headline, I thought it was so funny. And I was like, oh, this is a very specific experience that Julia must relate to. And then when we posted it on Instagram, there was so many people, like so many, sharing it saying, oh, this is me, this is me, this is me, this is exactly what I experienced. So Julia, can you talk a little bit about your story and sort of why you think it resonated with so many people, despite being so specific.
I'm really glad that it resonated because it's definitely like a silly story. Basically, I wrote a kind of like celebrity gossip tabloid piece about this like mysterious new fashion icon who's seen wearing different outfits every time she's spotted during New York Fashion Week, including oversized shirts, headphones, a literal blanket, and like sweaters of various textures. And it turns out this like enigma is just a woman with sensory issues who keeps changing because her little brain keeps switching from hot to cold, sensory avoidant to sensory seeking. I'm really happy it resonated with other people because I definitely wrote it about my own experience specifically. I love fashion, especially thrifting, and it's something my family always did together growing up. My mom thrifts, my grandma thrifts, and we're constantly like texting each other, showing off our newest finds. And I'm also neurodivergent and chronically ill, and I have a lot of diagnoses. That's like the shorthand I use, but it's hard to feel beautiful sometimes when you're constantly struggling with your body, when like the way you naturally walk and talk and hold yourself isn't necessarily what's expected of you or the norm. It can be kind of hard to feel pretty, you know, or things like that. So to me, this story was about kind of reframing that. So like instead of the way I walk being awkward, it's mysterious. And like my noise canceling headphones are like trend setting. And I change outfits throughout the day because like my threshold for different sensory things changes a lot. But like, you know what? That's iconic actually. It's a silly story, but it's not an uncommon experience. And now when I have to wear sunglasses inside the grocery store because like supermarket lights for some reason are like a special kind of sensory hell, there's a lot of times this little voice in my head that's just like, look at you, you're like hiding from the paparazzi. So yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. So in a little bit, we're going to get to the question and answer portion. So for everyone watching, start thinking about any questions, and I think there's a special Q&A feature somewhere on Zoom that you'll be able to send them through. But before we get to that, I have a few questions that are sort of general for all the panel. And I think these are questions that really get to the heart of what we do at the Squeaky Reel. So the first question is, as a person with a disability, how do you use humor in your day-to-day life? And Leslie, can you kick that one off for us?
Well, I mean, I'm expecting everyone to say how it's really good at disarming people and ingratiating them to you, you know, making them like you. But I just use it to enjoy my life, really, to be honest. When I really, really think about it, the only times I really reference my disability to those who are closest to me and know me most are when we're making jokes about it. Whether it's like running down the street, well, my girlfriend running down the street with me in the chair, seeing a ramp and going, I bet we could get some air. Or, you know, leading me back to reenact the Spider-Man kiss. You know, stuff like that. It's just there for me to really enjoy myself. And I think it's a great way of coping with difficulty. It's a great coping mechanism.
Completely agree. Nate, do you want to answer that one as well?
I find things funny internally. I don't actively make jokes at other people. Anecdotally, one time I thought I hit a woman's car when I was opening the door to an Uber, and I ended up like tripping and falling, and I got up and she didn't care about me hitting the car. And I thought that was absolutely hilarious, but I didn't tell her. I just silently appreciated it.
Very funny. So she didn't care because you were disabled,
I
and
fell.
therefore she was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. Very fun. Let's just go down the line. So Alexia, can you share?
Yeah, I think being hard of hearing things are just funny all the time because I hear the wrong thing. And that can lead to some very like awkward or just hilarious situations. Or like I keep just a running list of when Zoom captions or cart captions say something hilariously incorrect. And I've actually made like a little magazine where I just like illustrate them because sometimes they're just so absurd. And I also like find myself using like making jokes about my disability a lot, in ways to like remind people, because I think people can forget and fail to accommodate me a lot, or in ways to like point out when disability is like a positive, helpful thing. Like if people are complaining about like construction noise, I'll just be like, just take your hearing aids out. Like what was your deal? Like just take your hearing aids out, to remind people of kind of like the deaf gain or like disability positives.
Very fun. Angela, would you like to share?
Sure. So I use it as a coping mechanism as well. Like Leslie, my eye disease is degenerative, which means that I'm slowly going blind. So for me, the grieving cycle is kind of nonstop, right? Just when I think I've accepted my current, situation, something throws me off, throws it off, like, I'll trip and fall because I didn't see a safety cone, the arch nemesis of people with RP, or, my central vision has like, blurry spots. And, that kind of, puts me back into like square one. And so I use humor to help with my mental health. Because, like in all honesty, like going blind really sucks, so and then when the doctors tell you that there's no cure or treatment, it's have a good day, see you next year for your annual checkup, suck it up, buttercup. You're gonna find like you need to find a way to accept it, and to cope and not to slip into like this black hole of what the hell am I gonna do. So for me, it was writing was also therapeutic, and I actually started a blog. But then I just got really sick of it because I was just writing like, oh my God, Angela is so sad. She, poor me. And it was so whiny. So when I heard you, Stephen, on one of the podcasts, I remember thinking, oh, this would be a really great way, to educate people, to make people laugh, and then it helps me mentally as well. So that's how I became a squeaky wheel writer, and it really helps a lot. So I think for me, that's the way I use humor.
Thank you for sharing that. I think sort of the idea of also, like you mentioned, when you're writing on your own blog, it can be kind of hard and sad, or it can be tricky to avoid these stereotypes when you're telling your own story as a disabled person, especially if you're concerned with sort of finding an audience and trying to appeal to a large group of people, especially if you're trying to appeal to people without disabilities. It can be quite challenging to write about yourself. And I think
definitely.
that was one of the main goals of Squeaky Wheel too, is it gives people a platform to write things that are funny and based on their experiences, but without having to sort of go to that awkward, vulnerable place of like, look at this real life discrimination I faced yesterday. So before we move on, Julia, do you want to talk a little bit about how you use humor in your everyday life?
Yeah, I definitely second what everyone has said so far. I experienced pretty painful episodes, sometimes seizures, and I found that getting frustrated with my poor health typically only makes things worse. So stress kind of worsens episodes, and you kind of can fall into the cycle with it all. So here, I think being lighthearted honestly just like helps me manage that pain. Also, my boyfriend is an EMT firefighter. You might have seen him like army crawling across the floor to get to our kitchen a second ago. But it actually turns out that's extremely helpful when you're disabled. So like 10 out of 10 would recommend firefighter boyfriends. But one thing that they do, oh yeah, definitely look into it. But at work, when like arriving on scene, they usually ask these like kind of simple questions to gauge how like alert or aware a patient is. So sometimes he'll do this with me too. So these little questions like how many quarters are in a dollar, or like where's the pain, or who's the president, or things like that. And as he describes it, he can determine how alert I am by how snarky my responses are. So I think if like that's not love, I don't know what is.
Very, very fun. I'm gonna do one more question for the group before we move on to sort of the Q&A portion. And this is a question inspired by Real Abilities Film Festival. Again, one of the groups involved in planning this event. So I love movies. I think all of us on this call love movies. But people think often of comedy movies as silly popcorn entertainment, and not necessarily as serious or as important as more dramatic, meaningful films. I love comedies because I think they have a real tangible impact on the audience, especially when they're using humor to talk about a topic that might otherwise be really sensitive. So my question for all of you guys is, do you have a favorite funny disabled movie character? And how do you think humor on screen can really change the way that people see disability? And I will start this off by saying this is a hard question because, again, disability is not something that's portrayed that well that often. But I thought this would be a good one for our group. So I'll go down the line again. Leslie, why don't you start?
Yeah, I was scratching my head for a while thinking about this because, disability inclusion, it's not that common, but the character of Igor in Young Frankenstein, I thought, there we go. Because it helps that Marty Feldman, who played him, was a disabled actor as well at the time and a comedy writer. But just like that one line in the film where the guy goes up to him saying, I'm a very talented surgeon. I could do something about that hump. And he just goes, what hump? And I just thought that is the best way to frame it. He has absolutely no idea. There's nothing wrong with him. And I just for the 70s, it was pretty good. I'll stick with that one.
I love that. I will also note for our audience, disabled actors playing disabled characters like in Young Frankenstein actually used to be much more common back in earlier films, and then it kind of grew out of popularity as the movie star became more of a concept. And now in the last 5 or so years, we're seeing a real shift back in that direction of casting disabled people. But having disabled people in your movie in the 1930s was actually a really cool thing to do, and people did because people didn't get to see people with disabilities otherwise. It was the only way. All right, Nate, why don't you go next?
My favorite is Nika Pierce from the Child's Play franchise. She's a paraplegic played by an able-bodied character, but I like her because she's trapped at home by circumstances, but she uses a lot of passive-aggressive wit against her parents and killer dolls. Yeah.
Very, very good answer. Alexia, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I think my favorite disabled character is Dory from Finding Nemo / also from her own film, Finding Dory. Obviously, she was incredible enough to star in her own. I think Dory is such a good disabled character because she's so goofy and lovable. She shows some internalized ableism, which is tough. She's always apologizing for when she forgets things. But I also think that the Fish movies do a good job of not doing the overcoming disability trope. There's a lot of examples of her parents accommodating her and the whales accommodating her and helping her. She just kind of is who she is, and she's just a great little fish. So way to go, Dory.
Agreed. And another great example of people not seeing disability as disability, even though it's everywhere. Dory, very clearly disabled character. Nemo, another very clearly disabled character. But again, it's not thought of as a disability movie, but I see it that way. Angela, what about you?
So to be honest, like I had quite a hard time with this question because I kind of realized I like humor, I like movies, but I don't necessarily like humorous movies. And if you look at my Netflix suggestions, it's a lot of crime and drama and murders and thrillers. So much so that my boyfriend has asked me, like, should I be afraid of you? So I thought about the movies, and mine was also Dory, in Finding Dory. So
Very fun.
and I love animation, movies. And so for me, like, I like Dory because she had the short-term memory, and at first, she finds it as like sort of like a negative trait, like it's like a flaw, and then by the end of the film, she recognizes that it's something that makes her unique, and so that's one of the characters that I really like.
Again, thank you for sharing that. I think it also speaks to the quality of representation out there when this is the most general question ever and two people are picking the same fish. Because there needs to be more funny disabled characters out there. But for
To be
now,
honest,
we
I
have
wish I
Dory.
would have said Dory now, to be honest, because that's a great answer.
It is a good one. I didn't think of it, but now that you both said it, I'm like, that probably beats every character I would have picked as well. Julia, can you share your favorite disabled character?
Yeah, so I also struggled with this question, but instead of saying Dory, I just cheated and picked a TV show. So
Yeah.
a couple years ago, I became really hyper fixated on this like comedy TV show on Hulu. It's called Everything's Gonna Be Okay, and I recommend like everyone check it out. It's written and led by Josh Thomas, and it follows this 20-something who basically like finds himself becoming the legal guardian of his two half sisters, one of which is autistic. And it features the first autistic main character played by an autistic actor on TV, I believe. And this came out like 2020, so that was like that's if that tells you something. But it's a really hilarious show, and the main character there, Matilda, is hilarious. But it portrays neurodivergence in such like a complex way. It's the first time I saw like sensory overload really portrayed, watched a character like adjust their definition of success instead of just like overcoming their disability. It also shows like a romantic relationship between two neurodivergent people and like how they meet each other's needs. Most interesting to me is that the show's creator, who I mentioned like earlier, actually got diagnosed with autism and ADHD while working on this show. So basically, through all the research, he kind of did some self-reflection, and he actually chose to weave that into season 2. So the show actually portrays like the nuance of late diagnosis, which I think is like a really rare thing to get to see. And like, I think here's a very tangible example of why this is important is like, I at the time like thought that I was neurotypical and watching this show, and I was like, this show is just like really funny. It's just like so relatable for like quirky reasons, I guess. But watching Josh Thomas's character like reflect on his own experiences and kind of like come to his own realizations, it's like, oh yeah. So it kind of like led to reflection for me too. And I think humor kind of lets disabled people own their stories and kind of have that fun. And I think also like that representation is important for reasons like that.
That is a great answer. I will also note on that sort of experience of watching it and resonating to it that we've received a couple of emails when posting Squeaky Real Stories of people who very clearly say, I'm not disabled, but I relate to your thing because this, and this. And then I'm like, are you sure? Like you're related, you're like, I'm not disabled. I broke my leg and I'm ill and I'm in the hospital a lot. And I'm like, are you sure that it's not the actual experience that you're relating to? So I think that's a really funny anecdote. And now we are going to move over to the Q&A for our last few minutes. I'm going to go in the little Zoom Q&A function. If anyone watching wants to write in questions, feel free to do so, and I will sort of read through them and share them with our panelists. So the first one I see is from William S., who says, my name is William. I'm a disabled activist. How can I grow what I do? Okay, so I did that question. I'll take. I think from sort of launching the Squeaky Wheel and trying to grow it, one of the things I found is that there's a lot of disabled people online. So I think virtual events like this, using social media as actively and engagingly as you can, being able to really engage with your audience, answer messages, reply to comments, things like that really helps grow your following. And I think in terms of disabled activism, there's a million different ways to be an activist. You can do everything from create content on your own, writing letters to people in power to sort of share your opinions. You can go to protests, you can be involved in groups. There's a million different ways to get active, but on the topic of pleasure activism, you're gonna have the most success if you engage in a way that's fun for you and enjoyable. The way that I do activism, quote unquote, is by writing silly stories because it's fun for me to do that. And by helping other people write silly stories, that's even more fun for me. Is when I have talented writers like Leslie and Nate and Julia and Angela and Alexia who have these ideas, and I get to be the one that posts them on the account and shares them out to the world. So that's really fun. Leslie, do you have something to add?
Yeah, shout out to Project Billinghurst, who helps make protesting more accessible, not only by giving like advice pamphlets, but also like developing technology to allow us to protest better and easier and safer. I just got in contact with someone the other day who works on it, and that would be a great thing to look up if you're interested in disabled activism.
Absolutely, shout out to Project Billinghurst, and Richard M, I believe is the creator of
Yes.
that. So it's a small world. Me and Leslie did not plan this, but we're both on the
very,
same
very small
event.
world.
Yes, so that is a great way to get involved. Another question from Anonymous says, have you noticed different responses to your posts from disabled people versus non-disabled people? I would say yes. The disabled people often are the ones saying, I relate to this, and this is me, and sort of it's very clear to them what we're doing. I think non-disabled people often come to our accounts and get a little confused because they don't necessarily understand it's a joke, or they get that it's a joke, but they don't get why we're making the joke and things like that. And that's why I say Squeaky Wheel can be very educational, because I think more often than not, those people do end up digging deeper into our feed and reading more stories and trying to figure out what we're doing. So I think that non-disabled people get a little more education from it. Alexia, why don't you add on to what I'm saying?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, this is sarcasm, that my favorite typical non-disabled comment I see is when people get mad at the Squeaky Wheel saying like, you shouldn't make jokes about disabled people, like that's not funny, you should not laugh about that. I find those comments hilarious personally. So
Nate, you want to add something?
Yeah, when I got my first comment from an able-bodied person being offended, I screenshotted it and saved it. So
Very fun. I think a lot of us sort of take a little honor in people getting riled up. I always like to make it clear we're not out there to make people angry. That is certainly not our goal, but sometimes the right balance of it can draw attention and can also educate people. It really can. People who are angry are more motivated than anyone to really research. So if it makes people do their research and learn more, that's great. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to pick one more question. And if everyone in this group is on board, I think this will be a fun one for all of us. That says, from Anonymous, I'm in a wrongful termination lawsuit. It's not fun, and it's not funny at all. Or is it? How would you bring humor to this situation, especially when you are asked to prove pain and suffering? So I think, again, this is kind of the goal of Squeaky Wheel, is take these things that can be really dark or complicated and make them humorous. My first sort of instinct is that wrongful termination is a very painful experience for people. It's hard, but I think that if you found the right angle, it would be funny. We've done a story before that was actually about wrongful termination, which was something along the lines of you were fired totally not because of your disability, for completely other things. It just happens to be a coincidence, I swear. Again, just another example. But I would love to hear if any of our panelists sort of have experiences with things like that or anything funny to share. Leslie, I see you laughing.
Yeah,
Anything
I'm
else?
formulating a punchline, something about like, no, actually, I was wrongfully hired in the first place to work here, but I need some time to give it a good punchline.
I think that's a great one to end it on. And yes, so we have a couple minutes left. I would love to just thank everyone who joined. Thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to everyone at Lincoln Center again who made this possible and who made this accessible. Thank you to Real Abilities Film Festival. There's still a couple days left of Real Abilities Film Festival, so if you want to watch some really great movies made by disabled people, starring disabled people, go online. It's all virtual as well, so you can watch all those movies from your home, but I believe you only have 2 days left to watch. So please get on that. There's also a Real Abilities event at Lincoln Center tomorrow if you're in New York. And again, thank you, Lincoln Center. Thank you to Carrie and Jane and Candace and Miranda and Tora and all of our Lincoln Center friends. Carrie, would you like to close it up?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to Stephen and all of our wonderful panelists for tonight's event. Thanks again to Real Abilities. Again, the festival closes on Wednesday, so you still have a few more days. Thank you to our captioner, Jane, to Katura and Candace, our ASL interpreters. And thank you all for spending so much time with us this evening. If you want to spend more time with Lincoln Center people, you can feel free to join us tomorrow at the event that we're doing at the David Rubenstein Atrium. We would love to have you all there. And we hope that you can join us for another Lincoln Center event, either virtual or in person, very soon. So thank you all again and have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye-bye.
Black screen, text in white reads. Check out the Squeaky Wheel on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or at the-squeaky-wheel.com. For more information about the Real Abilities Film Festival, please visit realabilities.org/New York. And you can visit lincolncenter.org/access for a calendar of upcoming in-person and virtual events. To learn more about our individual panelists, please visit the following links: Stephen Verdile, www.stephenverdile.com, Nate Woogan, the-squeaky-wheel.com/author/discploitation reviews, Alexia Kemmerling at LexChem on Instagram, Julia Lee Harder at Julia Lee Harder on Instagram, Angela Woon, the number 2 shoes, number 4 eyes on Instagram, Leslie Moon at Blockhead Prime on Twitter.